Ladies and gentlemen, the story of the US government potentially shutting down has sparked a lot of mixed opinions in recent days, and today, let's start by talking about this issue together. Of course, we'll have a few topics to discuss, not just the US government shutdown, but this particular matter is currently causing quite a bit of division in the community, with everyone having their own viewpoint. So we'll clarify this story first. As you know, the United States is a country that plays a leading role globally, possessing an outstanding economic strength and a massive financial system. Yet it frequently faces situations where the government is forced to shut down due to not being allocated an operating budget. This situation just happened again on October 1st, when the US government officially shut down because Congress had not reached an agreement on budget allocation. And this event immediately became a controversial topic, sparking debate and making waves in international media. The question that arises here is, how can a superpower run out of money to the point of having to temporarily shut down its government like that? The answer doesn't lie in economic capability, but rather in the very mechanism of democracy unique to the United States, where Congress, including both chambers, holds the power to approve the budget. And every time there is a disagreement between the two major parties, the budget once again becomes a tool for political bargaining. A government shutdown does not equate to weakness. Rather, it reflects a very distinctive feature of a liberal democratic system, where no individual or organization has the authority to spend without public approval. And if you compare this to China, America's rival, where the entire budget and fiscal power are concentrated in the hands of the Beijing government, then a government running out of money is impossible. It's unthinkable because that system operates on the principle of absolute centralized power. However, this also comes with the risk of lacking transparency and having no mechanism for opposition oversight. We can't hold any single president responsible in this system, not even President Donald Trump, because government shutdowns are a recurring phenomenon that have been tied to the history of the US budget for many decades. Instead of being a sign of instability, it actually serves as evidence of the tug of war, sometimes intense, between branches of power to maintain a balance. But at the same time, this is also a loophole that strategic rivals of the United States, such as Russia and China, can exploit to create confusion or deepen the sense of instability within America itself. We know that the American democratic system is built on the principle that power belongs to the people. The president is the head of the executive branch, but the authority to allocate and control the budget lies in the hands of the two chambers, namely the Senate and the House of Representatives, with legislators elected directly by the voters. This is a mechanism to protect citizens' rights and prevent reckless government spending. However, when political forces clash for their own interests, this mechanism can become an obstacle that paralyzes the entire system. Recently, a heated debate broke out in the Senate. The Democratic Party wants to use tens of billions of dollars from the federal budget to cover healthcare costs for undocumented immigrants. The Republican Party opposes this, arguing that the budget should focus on security, national defense, and more urgent domestic issues. And in an effort to block the budget vote, the Democrats resorted to a familiar tactic in the Senate. That is the filibuster procedure. It's a maneuver used by senators to prolong debate by speaking continuously in order to block or delay the passage of legislation they disagree with. And by holding the floor and speaking continuously, they prolong the debate to the point where the opposing side is forced to give in. But to end a filibuster, at least 60 affirmative votes are needed. In the current situation, the Republican Party, although holding the majority, only has 53 seats, while the Democratic Party has 45 seats and 2 independent senators hold 2 seats. However, those 2 independent senators still vote with the Democrats. Therefore, the Republicans cannot end the filibuster. Without a budget being passed, the US government is forced to shut down. This is not just an administrative deadlock, but also a warning about an increasingly polarized democracy, where each branch of power can become an obstacle to its own nation. While Washington is caught up in internal conflicts, global rivals can fully take advantage of this gap to increase their influence and challenge the United States' superpower status on the world stage. And when the government once again falls into a shutdown, what surprises the public is not just that the budget wasn't passed, but the reason behind this deadlock. Not long ago, the Democratic Party actually supported a similar budget proposal, so what has changed in just a few months? Part of the answer lies in a controversial welfare policy. Many Democratic lawmakers want to restore medical benefits for undocumented immigrants. This isn't just speculation, it has been clearly reflected in the legislative documents they've recently introduced. The Republican Party, with its stance of prioritizing legal American citizens, firmly opposes spending on those outside the current tax and welfare system. However, the issue doesn't just stop at policy. In reality, the bigger battle is actually within the Democratic Party itself. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who once held a cautious stance, is now being pushed into a position where he has to appease the far-left faction within his own party. The threat comes from progressive Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who wields significant influence among young people and left-leaning movements, and this is putting Schumer at risk of losing his position in the primary election. Pressure from the far left has led Schumer to choose a strategy of delay rather than compromise. Instead of joining hands with Republican senators and moderate Democratic members, but instead of maintaining government operations, he chose to listen to the internal opposition group, trading national stability for his own political safety. This is exactly the moment when party polarization is no longer just a theory, but becomes a real obstacle to the functioning of the government. And when the machinery of the nation is forced to shut down just because of electoral calculations, it is no longer an internal matter, but a strategic issue that can weaken America's superpower status on the global stage. Many people might wonder, if the US government shuts down, wouldn't the whole country fall into chaos? But in reality, it's completely different. Because in the American democratic system, the people are the true owners of the nation. The government is merely a machine elected by them to manage and serve. The president, the head of the executive branch, along with the team of agencies and departments, are considered employees entrusted by the voters' ballots. Therefore, if the government has to temporarily shut down because Congress does not approve the budget, people's lives still go on as usual, although there will certainly be some impact on public services. And this is nothing new. Since 1981, the federal government has shut down 14 times already. The longest shutdown happened nearly 6 years ago, also under President Donald Trump, and lasted for 35 consecutive days. So what actually happens when the government shuts down? About 740,000 federal employees will have to take unpaid leave. However, essential agencies such as the military, federal transportation systems, and even the Federal Reserve, which is an independent agency, will continue to operate as usual. Meanwhile, other departments and agencies such as the Treasury Department, Congress, housing authorities, and especially the national park and museum systems across the United States will have to partially or completely suspend their operations. A government shutdown, as we've analyzed, does not mean a collapse. Rather, it's part of a complex political mechanism where every branch of power must comply with the law. And for Americans, government shutdowns have become all too familiar. There's nothing strange about them anymore. The real impacts are spreading widely, from administrative centers to every family, every child. Passport offices, visa processing, and social security card agencies are forced to shut down or extend their processing times. A series of support programs such as food stamps and unemployment benefits are delayed, causing millions of low-income people to fall into instability. The airport security control system, which is an indispensable part of the national defense infrastructure, is severely affected as staffing levels are cut, pushing the aviation industry into a state of overload and widespread flight delays. Even the streets in many major US cities have started to see garbage piling up as public sanitation services come to a halt. At public schools, millions of underprivileged students have lost their daily free school meals, one of the most important social welfare policies of the US education system. Within the government apparatus, nearly 750,000 employees have been forced to take unpaid leave, living in a state of indefinite waiting, as we have mentioned. And many experts believe that this could be an opportunity for the White House to implement administrative restructuring measures. Previously, President Trump himself had asserted that the federal apparatus was too cumbersome and needed to be streamlined. In an emergency situation like the current one, reassessing the efficiency of each department is entirely possible, not as a political move, but as a necessary strategic step. And to address the crisis of confidence, Senator Rick Scott has put forward a deterrent proposal. During a government shutdown, lawmakers, those with decision-making power, should also forgo their salaries. This is a direct message to the entire Congress that if the country comes to a standstill, the responsibility cannot fall on ordinary citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, the budget crisis in the United States is pushing the national leadership apparatus into an unprecedentedly passive position. If an agreement is not reached within the next 14 days, the Democrats, even though They currently hold many key committees, will still be unable to avoid having to sit down with the Republicans to find a way out. Because this is not just an internal political chess game, the deadlock is blowing apart the image of US governance right on the global stage, making allies anxious and prompting adversaries to closely watch every move. Ladies and gentlemen, while Washington is in utter chaos, the world is erupting with another hotspot, the Mediterranean. On October 2nd, the Israeli Navy approached and intercepted the Global Summit flotilla, which consisted of 4 ships carrying more than 500 international activists heading toward the waters off Gaza. Leading this group is Greta Thunberg, the Swedish climate activist famous for her outspoken criticism of President Donald Trump. Also present are a former Pakistani parliamentarian and a member of the European Parliament. This only makes the event more tense, filled with political overtones and symbolism. From Tenavitz's strategic perspective, the actions of the Global Summit fleet have all the hallmarks of an organized act of provocation. With the announcement that they are transporting international activists to break the blockade to Gaza, which is currently the focal point of a large-scale Israeli military campaign against Hamas elements. The journey of these ships is seen as an intrusion into the area of national security influence. And immediately after entering the waters controlled by Israel, the country's navy acted swiftly, deploying close approach tactics and neutralizing the entire formation without any significant resistance from those civilian ships. Israeli authorities later confirmed that they had completely taken control of the fleet and brought all the activists to a detention center for further investigation into their specific motives. The presence of Greta Thunberg on board immediately escalated the incident into a hot topic on international media channels, extending beyond the scope of regional politics. Immediately after being subdued by Israeli naval forces and escorted to the port of Ashdod, activist Greta appeared before the international media cameras in a state of exhaustion and deep emotion. When asked about her recent experience, she spoke in a halting voice. "It's very concerning because people are not being treated well. I couldn't say goodbye to everyone and I don't know what's happening. And there are so many problems." Following this statement, the reporter continued to press, asking what she meant when she said people were not being treated well. "Could you explain that to us more clearly?" Greta replied that clearly, in a very inhumane way, but of course I must emphasize that it's nothing compared to what the Palestinians are going through. However, when directly asked about what actually happened at the Ashdod port, Greta's answer was unclear. "No, I don't want to go into detail about that. We went there, we were detained, and then She hesitated, paused, and didn't continue speaking. The hesitant answer, lacking any specific details about acts of violence or coercion, has led media analysts to raise many questions. The question is whether this is a tactic to shape public opinion or a natural reaction to psychological pressure. Meanwhile, a recently released video from the Global Summit Fleet Monitoring Campaign has revealed a very unexpected detail. Right before the Israeli Navy forces approached and as the operation to suppress began, several key figures on this ship, including a European Parliament member named Hachan and many crew members, deliberately threw their mobile phones into the sea. And this action immediately sparked a wave of suspicion. If this was merely a humanitarian delegation going to Gaza with the stated goal of providing aid to the people, then why was it necessary to destroy all personal communication devices in the final moments before being detained? What are they trying to hide? Some defenders argue that throwing away the phones was to protect privacy in case personal data fell into the hands of military forces. But is that explanation really convincing? Recently, the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, released a document that was seized from a Hamas outpost in the Gaza Strip. This document reveals that the Hamas leadership has direct financial ties to individuals and entities connected to the Summit fleet. Specifically, the document shows that Hamas used shell companies to fund the fleet's operations and even directly owned some of the vehicles in this group. Among these, the most notable cases involve 2 individuals, one holding British citizenship and another with Spanish citizenship named KS. Investigations from the Israeli side reveal that Kass is currently the CEO of Neptune Network, an entity backed by Hamas, which secretly owns dozens of civilian vessels, including several ships that are part of the Summit formation. If this information is fully verified, it will raise serious questions about the independence and the true nature of the so-called humanitarian aid flotilla. Could it be that behind the slogans for peace lies a logistical network serving Hamas's soft strategy to infiltrate international public opinion? And if that's the case, do Greta Thunberg and the other activists on the ship realize that they are sitting on a much more dangerous chessboard than they think? On October 2nd, Israeli War Minister Katz officially announced the complete blockade of all main routes leading into Gaza City, while also issuing what is considered the sternest warning since the beginning of the campaign. This is the last chance for the residents of Gaza City to evacuate. And that statement was nothing less than the opening drumbeat for a full-scale offensive campaign, with the clear objective of completely eliminating the presence of Hamas forces inside the largest urban center of the Gaza Strip, which is Gaza City. The fact that Israel used the phrase last chance is a strategic affirmation that the noose is tightening and the Israeli army is ready to enter the most brutal phase of the war. A very strong affirmation. At the same time, on the other side of the globe, there were also many heated stories unfolding. President Trump unexpectedly made a pivotal move in his policy of supporting Ukraine, according to a report from the Wall Street Journal. Trump signed an executive order allowing U.S. intelligence agencies to directly participate in supporting Ukraine, designating targets deep within Russian territory, specifically key energy facilities such as oil refineries, power stations, and fuel pipeline systems. This is a major escalation in the structure of military aid. From a defensive role, Washington has now officially stepped into a proactive combat role. The Russian economy is heavily dependent on oil and natural gas exports. They account for nearly 40% of the state budget revenue. And allowing Ukraine to strike at energy targets is a move aimed directly at Moscow's ability to sustain its finances, the very resources needed to continue the war. And that means that conventional economic sanctions are no longer effective enough. And the US is now having to use direct physical attacks through Ukraine to break the financial structure of its opponent. In that context, simultaneous campaigns in Gaza and the Eastern European battlefield show that the global geopolitical map is changing in a way that cannot be reversed. The combination of military pressure and economic manipulation is ushering in a new era where wars are no longer confined by geography, but instead form a network of transnational levers that are closely interconnected. In addition, in another development, some reports indicate that Trump is also actively considering providing Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine. This is one of the most precise long-range offensive weapons in America's strategic arsenal. Along with that is another type of tactical missile that has not yet been disclosed. It is highly likely that it belongs to the group of weapons capable of penetrating and destroying military infrastructure deep within enemy territory. Now that the Tomahawk is also entering the battlefield, the Russians are probably truly trembling. If approved, this would mark a major turning point in US military aid policy, not just limited to defensive support or target designation like previous aid packages, but actually placing in Ukraine's hands the means to deliver strikes capable of penetrating Russia's deepest air defense layers, reaching logistics centers, energy infrastructure, and even military bases located hundreds or even thousands of kilometers from the front lines. It should be remembered that the Tomahawk's range is at least 1,600 kilometers. Moscow's response was immediate and not at all delayed. President Putin has issued a warning that if the US actually supplies Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine, it will be considered a direct attack by the US on Russia. This statement is not just a diplomatic warning, it also carries a clear military implication. The transfer of weapons capable of changing the strategic balance would cross the red line that Russia has repeatedly warned the West about. And that puts both Europe and NATO on high alert. The activation of a highly accurate American missile by Ukraine, which then flies directly into Russian territory, will trigger an uncontrollable chain reaction, leading to military and political responses from both blocs. From the blockaded Gaza Strip to the missile-filled skies over Donetsk, the world is witnessing a terrifying shift from regional conflicts to global confrontation. And if a Tomahawk missile leaves its launcher, it won't just be a physical strike on a target on the map. It will signal the start of an entirely new strategic era, where every diplomatic barrier could be incinerated in just a few minutes of a warhead's flight. And we can see that the battlefield in Ukraine is also heating up day by day, especially as the United States has recently almost completely changed its policy from the Trump era, becoming much more resolute against Russia. Perhaps Trump also feels that Putin has outmaneuvered him many times, and this time he wants to teach Putin a lesson. There have already been many times when the red line has been crossed. And we will have to wait and see which direction this major war in Europe will take. In this context, both Russia and Ukraine are at a stalemate on the battlefield. Russia has sent troops to fight for a long time, but still hasn't achieved victory. As for Ukraine, although they are defending well, they still cannot launch an offensive to reclaim the territory that has been lost to Russia. Currently, 19% of Ukraine's territory is under Russian control. Meanwhile, the United States continues to stay on the sidelines, acting as a mediator. But there's also a deadlock. Despite mediating for so long, these two sides keep fighting and neither is willing to back down. So, when we look at the context of this war, it's a stalemate. Russia, the US, and Ukraine are all at an impasse. NATO, the EU, everyone is stuck in a deadlock. No one can resolve it. And perhaps people will just have to wait patiently a bit longer. Or maybe there will be some kind of major change, some huge upheaval that could finally bring this war to an end. Otherwise, the fighting will just drag on year after year. Remember, before its collapse, the Soviet Union waged a military campaign in Afghanistan for 10 years, from 1979 to 1989. As for Russia now, it's been almost 4 years. Where will this story go from here? Please feel free to share your personal comments below. Goodbye and see you again.